Hello, this is CJ Radune of RotoWire.com here for your Formula One update on the Prime Sports Network. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our motorsports videos all season long, including NASCAR, IndyCar, and Formula One. And you can access my columns by clicking the link below. And if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to let me know what is on your mind. Coming up this week, we've got the Formula One Lenovo Japanese Grand Prix. But as usual, we've got to start with what happened last time out, and that was at Singapore, and specifically Red Bull's Singapore stumble. So we talked a lot last week about Max Verstappen and his struggles at Singapore and Red Bull's struggles at Singapore in general. And back in 2022, and we're questioning whether or not that would continue this season. He's had such a dominant season, and Red Bull along with him. It seemed almost insane to think that it might happen again in the 2022 scenario at Singapore, but it did. So Max Verstappen and Red Bull Racing's their win streak, it was halted with a Ferrari win at Singapore. How about that? Carlos Sainz took pole and he took command of that race from the start. He drove a very tactical race, and that enabled him to challenge those behind him by backing them up into traffic. And then once he was able to do that, all he had to do was just manage a comfortable gap, and they couldn't make an attempt at a pass. And Carlos Sainz cruised ahead for Ferrari's first win of the season. And in fact, the first win for any team outside of Red Bull this season. So, wow, craziness. But the first caution in Singapore that sent the field to the pits, it was bad news for Leclerc, Sainz's teammate at Ferrari. So it could have been a Ferrari 1-2, but Leclerc was held up and he lost that second position for the rest of the race, which ruined Ferrari's what could have been a 1-2 finish for them, locking out both spots on the podium. However, Sainz drove an absolutely perfect race. He remained in command and in the lead for the entire race and cruised on home, as I said, to his first victory of the season. So what about the other teams? Mercedes, they used another virtual caution period to switch to fresh tires without losing track position, and that duo then was able to track down Sainz as a result of that move, and that set up a battle until the end that Sainz was just working to manage. It put both of them, Mercedes, that tactical genius and that ability to make that call on the fly under that virtual safety car to get on fresh tires. They didn't lose track position. That enabled them to move into the podium spots and actually gave them a chance at the lead. So again, I've talked about it all season. The ability of Mercedes to call that race strategy is just unparalleled. They are the best at it. However, their plan unfortunately unraveled when Russell misjudged a corner and he hit the wall just a couple laps from the end, if not the very last lap. That ruined what ultimately could have been a great day for Mercedes as well, putting a couple of their drivers on the podium. However, despite Mercedes pushing, we still had Lando Norris and McLaren, and he made the most of his upgrades that weekend. We talked about it before. He was the only one from McLaren to get the full complement of upgrades on his car, and boy, did it pay off. He was in a good and challenging position all weekend, and it could give them hope for this week at Japan, where both cars are going to have that full set of upgrades available to them throughout the entire weekend. So Norris did a great job in Singapore as well. Obviously, Ferrari took the cake. So what was the biggest surprise? I think it was everybody's biggest surprise. Clearly, Red Bull. The team was just lost in terms of setup all weekend. You could tell it from practice all the way through qualifying, and then that continued on during the race, and it just left both cars floundering all weekend. Wasn't terribly different than last year's race for them, unfortunately. They just haven't figured out how to get the setup right for Singapore. So is it the end of the road for them? Absolutely not. Anybody that thinks that what they experienced in Singapore is going to continue this week in Japan, they might be a little bit delusional. Singapore is a very tough track, has thrown a curveball at many, many teams throughout its history. And I would expect this coming week's race in Japan to be a return to normalcy. And I think if we see Red Bull struggle again, then we know that there's significantly more to this story. So what is happening this week? It's time for the Japanese Grand Prix and that preview. Japanese Grand Prix is held at Suzuka Circuit. It's been the home of Formula One in Japan since 1987. There have been 32 prior races at the 5.8 kilometer circuit, and it's a natural terrain road course. It's in the shape of a figure eight, which is unique to Formula One and actually most racing circuits, to be honest with you. And it has a lot of very medium speed to high speed corners. Dating all the way back to 2009, though, this race has only been won by someone starting first, second, or third, and Verstappen won it from pole last season. So, why do I think that Red Bull and Max Verstappen are going to be back on top again in Japan? I think those of you who know Formula One know that the FIA issued a rules clarification on flexible floors just prior to Singapore. There was a lot of consternation in the pits, a lot of questions asked of team leaders how much it was going to affect their cars, and the timing of that actually coincided with Red Bull struggling at Singapore. However, when asked, Christian Horner of Red Bull how many changes they had to make to their car as a result of that rules clarification, he emphatically said no. Given their struggles back in 2022 at the track and seeing Mercedes and other teams flounder at Singapore in the past as well, I got to tend to believe them. So I think that Singapore is just a very unique track. It's very different than Suzuka. Suzuka's natural terrain. It's not a street course like Singapore. It's also got many more medium to high speed corners, unlike Singapore as well. And there are a whole bunch of other factors that go into that too, like the weather, the heat, the humidity, etc. The electronics that go underneath the track at Singapore, those just don't exist at Japan. So I think we are going to see Red Bull make zero changes to their car, as Christian Horner indicated when asked about that rules clarification in the flexible floor. And I think you're going to see Red Bull and Max Verstappen jump to the front again this week at Japan. So that brings us to what are our 3 questions for the weekend? So what are we going to be following? Well, very clearly, I just said it. Will Verstappen and Red Bull return to form? This track is a heck of a lot more like those that have suited their success all season to date. And I think that Red Bull has a chance to secure the constructors title, quite honestly, this week if they do return to form. Verstappen himself, because of his stumble last week at Singapore, he's going to have to wait to be able to shore up that or clinch his driver's championship until Qatar. But in Formula One, the constructors championship is everything, and Red Bull is gunning for it, and they are awfully close to getting it. And I wouldn't doubt a 1-2 from a Red Bull car perspective this weekend at Japan. And I think that they can clinch the Constructors' Championship this weekend, make it done and dusted for 2023. So what's the second question? Well, does last week's win make Ferrari hungry to keep pushing? We talked about it before. They were indicating of potentially, or I was thinking maybe, that they were potentially giving up on their 2023 Challenger and begin focusing on 2024. So are they going to keep focusing on 2023? Are they going to throw in the towel and start focusing on 2024? My answer is they're going to keep focusing on 2023 now. I mean, being the first team to win a race outside of Red Bull is no small feat. They've seen now 2 races in a row where they've been challenging at the front, and that battle for second position in the constructors title is rapidly becoming a two-horse race between them and Mercedes. And I think if they continue on the path that they are on, that we've seen both at Monza and at Singapore, I think their newfound competitiveness keeps them focused on 2023 for quite some time yet. So don't throw in the towel on Ferrari quite yet. Question number 3, how much do McLaren's slow corner upgrades help them at a place like Suzuka? It obviously paid dividends at Singapore. It was able to put Lando Norris in contention. I don't think the upgrades, since they were primarily focused on slower speed corners, I don't think they're going to be as much of a help at Japan as they were at Singapore. However, both cars are going to have it, and they're going to have last week's knowledge based on what Norris was able to do at the race with those upgrades in place. So I think they're going to be good. They're going to be better than they have been, but I don't think it's going to be as stark of a contrast as to where they were a week ago at Singapore. If so, though, I think that puts Mercedes and Ferrari in the battle for the rest of the podium versus Lando Norris, if I am right. So that brings us to Japan predictions. What's going to happen this weekend? Well, I kind of already told you. Take a look at the odds. I think anybody who is brave enough to go with Max Verstappen, which is priced at very much a sure thing, I think they're going to be rewarded this week with another win. I think Verstappen returns to the top of the heap. I think he dominates qualifying, but I think he's going to see a challenge from Ferrari. So over the past couple of weeks, we've either put Mercedes or Lando Norris, perhaps maybe even Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin up there as being the main challengers to Verstappen and Red Bull. This week with Ferrari, getting some confidence, having 2 weeks in a row where they've been really competitive, I think it's going to be Ferrari being your second step on the podium behind a Verstappen. If Sergio Perez is able to take advantage of his Red Bull car, he'll obviously be second on the podium, but I think the rest of those spots are going to belong to Sainz and Leclerc. So looking at the odds, obviously Verstappen priced as the sure thing here. Those who are brave enough to take him with those odds, I think they're going to be rewarded this week. Obviously your second best there is going to be Sergio Perez because he is in the Red Bull. But if you're going to go with anybody else, I might go with the winning team as a Ferrari. They're looking at a plus 900 there for the odds. That could be a really good bet this week, especially if anything happens, if we see any kind of weather issues. Suzuka has been rained on in the past. It's not foreign to a wet race, and when a wet race hits Suzuka, it generally becomes pretty unpredictable, and that's something maybe that Ferrari could take advantage of. But at the end of the day, I think Japan is very much shaping up to be a Max Verstappen and Red Bull clinching the constructors championship kind of weekend. And if you're going to go for the contrarian point of view, you might want to think about the Ferrari at the team level bet. So looking ahead to Japan, I think we're going to see Max Verstappen and Red Bull get back out ahead. I think we're going to see Ferrari consolidate that second position. Mercedes may give them a shout, but I think it's going to be Ferrari this weekend, a Red Bull, and then Ferrari type of weekend. So I hope you all enjoy Japan coming up this weekend. Again, I am CJ Radune of rotowire.com here for the Prime Sports Network. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of the motorsports videos all week long. We've got NASCAR, IndyCar, and what you're here for, Formula One. So you can access my columns by clicking the link below. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know. And until next time, keep it out of the fence.